Well, listen, I welcome all of you. It's so good to see people here because everybody's been gone for Christmas. We had several of us welcomed in the new year, and that was fun. That's something we're probably going to do in a more determined effort next year. We had some great fireworks, and we're hoping that it'll be better next year. Tony and I had a moment where one of the little cylinders had gotten clogged, and one of the big ones went up, and it didn't go very high. And I said, "Run!" We took off because it was high enough to where it came right down on us. But it was fun. Welcome to Facebook. Welcome to the YouTube. Let's get started. Again, my message is the decade to run. We've been studying through 1 John, but I've had a message. I just felt impressed over the last 2 weeks that I needed to share, kind of like I did on Christmas. I felt I wanted to focus on Christmas. And honestly, this is something that's been coming in my mind for the last 2 weeks. And I want to challenge, and what's interesting is we've already had it. Our worship time was a challenge. And then Saran challenged us to close the worship time. And I'm going to be offering you a challenge for this coming year, 2020, and this coming decade. So, get ready. I don't mean get ready for the year or the decade. I mean get ready for me right now, because I'm fired up. When I was a student here at Troy University doing my undergraduate degree, I would drive home every weekend because I worked in an athletic shoe store in Northside Mall, back when the malls were big. This is 1979. Excuse me. We mainly sold running shoes. I mean, we sold all kinds of shoes, but we mainly sold running shoes. Running had really taken off. And it was 1979. Runner's World was becoming a very popular magazine, so we had Runner's World in our store. A lot of our customers were runners. Now look, I hate running. I've never liked to run. But I always have run because I needed to train to be in shape for whatever sport I was playing. But that's the only reason I ran. I hate it. I still hate it. In high school at Dothan High, we had to run the half mile in a certain time. It was it wasn't a challenging time, but anybody who knows me knows that my goal was not to run it under the time the coach set. My goal was to run it as hard as I could, which I did. So I ran a half mile in 2:20, and then the second time we did it, I did a 2:12. Which, is not bad for someone who's never trained to run. I never trained to run. In fact, I've been told that I have a very ugly running gait. I've been told that multiple times. So no one's ever helped me learn how to run, but I just do it. So anyway, in this athletic shoe store, I needed to learn about running. I needed to learn about shoes because that was back in the old days where you actually helped the person. They didn't, I would sit on that little funny stool and I would put their shoe on and tie it. You know what I mean? That was old school. Nobody does that anymore. I enjoyed it. And we got a 40% discount on shoes. So I bought a lot of shoes over my 3 years working there. I bought a pair of Saucony trainers so I could wear them at work so at least the runners would see that I was wearing running shoes. But I was constantly asked, now do you run? And I would have to say, well, not really. I mean, I would run 1.5 miles, to keep in shape, and I would run it hard. I didn't jog, I ran. Short distance. Then I bought a pair of Nike distance shoes, bright yellow, real padded, because I decided I'm being asked too many times if I'm going to run, so I figured I better. Our store sponsored the first 10K race in Dothan that I remember, and I decided I needed to run this 10K. Because all customers are going to be there. And we needed to have no one else in the store was willing to run. So I said, okay, I'll run. I've never run anything past a mile and a half, but I'll do it. So I decided about 2 weeks before the race, maybe I better try to see if I can run that far, because I thought I would hate to not be able to finish the race. I'd be really embarrassed. So I got my friend, we drove to Rip Hughes football stadium, and I had mapped out, we didn't have internet or Google, Al Gore hadn't invented it yet. But, I went and drove in my car and mapped it. It was 5.8 miles back to my house. So it wasn't quite a 10K, 6.2. But I figured I'm going to try to run this. And I got this friend of mine. I said, we drove to the football stadium, and I said, I'm going to run home. And he said, you going to run home? I said, yeah. I need you to follow me in the car in case I'm about to die. I can jump in the car and you can take me home. Well, I made it. We didn't time it. I don't know how fast I ran it, and I didn't run. I jogged, but I was happy to know I could do it. So that was my training. That's the extent I did. So when the race day showed up, I ran the race. I didn't have a watch. I had no idea my time. I didn't think about any of that. I had one goal: finish the race. And I didn't want to walk. So I ran a very, very, very slow jog, again, fearful that I wouldn't make it. We turned the last leg of the race. It was a half mile. I was thinking it was about something, but I used Google Maps and figured out exactly how long. It was a half a mile stretch, slightly downhill to Houston Academy, if anybody knows where that is in Dothan. That's where the race started and ended. When I turned the last leg, I could see the finish line. And they had this huge digital clock telling you the time on the race. And as soon as I turned, I saw that clock, and I went, I don't remember what I said, but it probably wasn't fit for being on video. I was stunned. It was like 57 minutes and 30 seconds. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I just started sprinting, because all I could think about was, if I don't finish this in under an hour, I will never be able to tell anybody that I did it. I mean, I don't want anyone to ask me, I ran a 10K. What was your time? 63 minutes or whatever. So I started sprinting. All through the race, people had been passing me, and I didn't care. Because all I could think about was, I've got to finish, and I can't walk. Now I'm sprinting for the finish line, and I'm motivated suddenly. There's like 200 people in front of me. And I'm motivated because I'm suddenly thinking of don't be offended here, but all the women and children and out of shape people who had passed me during the race that I didn't care. Now I care, because I've got to finish this race in under an hour. This is so ridiculous. They had set bleachers up at the finish line, and it's filled with people, and they spot, who is this crazy guy sprinting? Because I'm passing everybody. And they're cheering me on, which is so embarrassing. Again, my eye is on that clock. I've got to break an hour. I passed the finish line. Who wants to guess what my time was?
59 minutes.
And 59 seconds.
I crossed at 59:59. I stumbled about 10 yards and collapsed because I thought I was going to pass out. And I was known in Dothan for, my Christian witness, working in that store. I played high school basketball. Everybody, or a lot of people knew me. And so now people are running up. Are you okay? Bringing me water and shoving cookies in my face. Al, are you okay? I'm like, just leave me alone. And when the food started coming, I felt like I was going to hurl on them, I was thinking, dude, I'm about to vomit. And so I stumbled up and stumbled 20 more yards to get away. I was so embarrassed. Oh, you did so great. You made it in under an hour. The winning time was like 31 minutes. And I knew what good times were. If I'd had a watch, I would have tried to break 50 minutes, and I would have been really happy. as it was. I made it in 59. I want to share a funny and embarrassing photo of myself from 1984, so everybody hold on. I was 26. I was living in Bellingham, Washington, doing my ministry training. I had a friend named Jack Lentelman who was a runner, and he had tried 2 marathons. And he had hit the wall both times and was unable to finish the marathon. So he was planning to run the Seattle Marathon. And he had told me all these stories. And I said, Jack, you're going to make this marathon. I'm going to wait for you at the 20-mile mark, and I'm going to get you through it, okay? And so he goes, okay. And so I was in Seattle, and when I saw him coming, I could see it in his face. He was about to quit. You know, anyone who knows anything about the marathon, a lot of people drop out at about 20 miles. It's called the wall. And so I did what any good friend would do. I jumped over the ropes and I started running with him. You know, I wanted to help him. I put this embarrassing photo up and you guys have a laugh. You know, I wasn't planning to run. So it was in the wintertime. I had my nice 1958 wool overcoat, which I really loved. Hope you guys like the mop on my head there. I don't know. All right, Leo. Why do you think I get on to you about your hair, man?
Sorry, yeah. Mario and Luigi.
Look how big the glasses are.
I know, I've got huge glasses. All right, okay. Take that down. All right, is it down? Good. So I had jumped in there and... What? Why is that funny? Okay. I jumped in there and started asking him, are you feeling okay? No. And, just telling him, okay, well, let's just try not to think about it. He was in pain. His whole body was aching. And so I started joking around. He was a jokester, and I started joking around with him. And, before I knew it, he was smiling and, saying things in between hard breathing. And I ran with him for about 2 or 3 miles. And then I said, are you going to make it? And he goes, I'm going to make it, man. Thanks. And then I got off the course. Somebody thought it was funny. I mean, it looks funny. And someone took a photo and then found Jack and gave him the photo, and then he gave me a copy of it. This photo hangs in my office in Texas. And I've treasured this photo over the years. He finished the race. And he told me that he wouldn't have done it had I not jumped in and run with him. It's a metaphor for this morning. I'm going to read a text, a famous text from Hebrews chapter 12. So we can get that up. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your goodness to us. You are so good and gracious. And we know we don't deserve it. I ask you to speak this morning. Help me to bring this message clearly. Help us to hear and help us to respond in Jesus' name. Amen. Sorry, I didn't expect to get emotional over that silly photo, but sorry. We're starting a new year and a new decade. We're thankful to have visitors here this morning. And so to the visitors, the folks in this church have heard me say over and over again, our relationship with Christ, our spiritual growth, cannot be measured in months or years. We measure our a proper measurement is by decades. That is very difficult if you're in your 20s. If you're older, it becomes more familiar that decades is how you view your spiritual life. I've been sharing very personally the last several months. I mean, I always open my life. I tell funny stories. I tell good stories about myself, and I tell bad stories about myself. And I've been sharing that after 43 years of walking my faith out, I'm experiencing a time of grace in my life that I've not experienced since I was first saved. And I shared several weeks ago that I can't explain it. I don't know why. I didn't feel like I did anything to make it happen. Some of you remember I said I almost didn't want to say anything because I was afraid God would take that from me. And, dare I say it, I'm still experiencing this, and I'm very happy about that. But in 10 years, we're going to hit 2030. And I will be 71. In 2030, after this decade, I will be 71. And it started coming to me that maybe I'm experiencing this time of my life. Possibly one variable is I can see the finish line now. I've never been able to say that till the last four or 5 years. My grandmother died 3 years ago at 109. My parents are now 82 years old, and I'm having to think about what the next decade will bring my parents. And I think all of that has made me realize I can see the finish line. I'm closer to the end than I am the beginning. I'm well past the mid-range of my life. Now any of us could die tomorrow, today. We could get hit by a truck. But I can see the finish line now. Like when I turned that corner, I saw that big clock. And I think that might have something to do with where I'm at in my spiritual life. Because as you get older and you can see the finish line, all the other junk fades away. It just doesn't matter anymore. Only the faith I'm running with and those closest to me matter. Nothing else I care about anymore. Now that's not fair if you're in your 20s and 30s because you can't see the finish line. But I think that's what happens. When we can see the finish line, the junk that we've lived for just doesn't matter as much anymore. We become more single-focused. I know I have become far more focused in my life. I do have regrets, and I've shared about it. I've failed God in many ways over 43 years. I've wondered over the last several years, mainly. I've wondered this for years. Why God was so gracious to me as a young man. I mean, even looking at that photo earlier this morning, how God used me as a young man in spite of struggling with my own sinfulness. Areas of sin I couldn't seem to get over. My own stupidity, which is still with me. My pride, which is still with me. I'm not saying my sinfulness is not with me, but it's not like it was in my 20s and 30s. My selfish ambition, I mentioned last week in one of the listings in the New Testament, selfish ambition is in there. Let me tell you, anyone who serves in ministry as a pastor is going to struggle with selfish ambition. And I would tell you a lot of people struggle with this. And it's deadly if you're in ministry and you have selfish ambition. It is deadly. It's probably in the listing of sins, not for all of us, but for those of us who bear the burden of being a pastor or a leader, because selfish ambition is very dangerous when you're a leader. But I struggle with that and many, many other areas in my life. And I'm beginning to think that God kept His grace on me, and that it had something to do with the fact that at 17 I started running a race, and I never stopped. In the midst of my struggles, I wouldn't stop. I was always afraid that if I stopped, that I wouldn't do it again. I turned down some really good paying jobs right out of school at Troy. And the reason I turned them down is because I had big dollar signs in my head. I had a fancy car. I had all these things in my head, and I was afraid that if I gave myself to that I might not ever turn back. And the sinfulness in my life was the same way, especially when I was here in Troy as a student. I was very tempted to live my life for hedonism, but I was always afraid if I did it, if I just stepped one foot in because of my personality, that I wouldn't stop. And I was always afraid that I would never get back in the race. So like the 10K I ran, I was always afraid that I wouldn't finish. And I didn't want to walk. And I didn't want to quit. And I think that might be part of why God kept His grace on my life. The text we just read says to run with endurance. The Greek word there it means to run through difficulty. It means to run when things aren't going well. It's bearing up under a load and not quitting. Just like an athlete has to do. I mean, anybody who's trained for any kind of athletic endeavor knows you have to push yourself to where you don't think you can make it. You have to. You have to bring yourself to the point of passing out to make sure that you're pushing yourself. And as a Christian, it's the same way. We have to push ourselves through difficulties in our faith. You have to. You're running a race that is long, and they'll have many difficulties and trials along the way. And if you don't develop spiritual muscles, you might not make it. Or you're going to stop. Or you're going to get distracted by something, and you're going to quit running the race. And I want to challenge you this morning to make 2020 the year that you decide to get serious about running the race of faith. No matter what age you are in here. I believe, now look, I'm not asking you to get ordained, or I'm not asking you to get in the ministry. I'm not asking you to do anything specific. You have to work that out in your own heart and mind. I have failed God in so many ways. But at 17, I made up my mind that I was going to run that race. And I've been successful in doing that by the grace of God. The text says, throw aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles. In the ancient world, they would wear a toga, or the Jews would wear a long cloak. But the Romans had a toga, same thing. Would go down below the knees. And when you went into battle, if you were a soldier or if you were going to run, you gathered it up and you used your belt to tie it around your waist so it would get out of the way, so you could run. And that's what he's talking about. And you can't carry a bunch of junk and run a fast race. So get rid of everything that slows you down. And that, of course, and the writer says it, and the sin that would entangle us. Some of us focus too much of our time and energy on things that have nothing to do with our spiritual race. Some of us get distracted and we're running fine, and then we see something glittery. We see something that grabs our attention and we stop running to go check it out. And then we get so enthralled with what it is, a relationship or a big 401k at the end of the road or whatever, the American dream or something else, a hobby, fun. And we get so focused and enamored on that thing that we sit down and we take a little break. And people are running by us. You know, we have friends who we know are running this race, and we know we're not. I'll do it in a minute. And those aren't necessarily sinful things, but they're things that entangle. They're things that keep you from running the race. I think that the kingdom of darkness is constantly wanting to get you to just stop running the race. Just, not even do anything terribly sinful. Just get over here and get distracted by something that is amoral. It's not immoral. It's just a thing. And I know in my life, I had a constant video playing in my head as a young man of my daily sins and my stupidities. And I heard a voice constantly saying, "You're never going to stop sinning. You're such a hypocrite. God can't possibly love you. And He's not going to keep forgiving you. You should just stop. Just go and live your life like you would have had you never come to Christ. Just go back and do that." And I think that video and that message in my brain was not me. It was the kingdom of darkness trying to get me to just stop. Quit running the race. Because the whole while, God was operating in my life. Some of us are content to just walk. I've been saying, if you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. If you can't crawl, find somebody to carry you. But I think some of us are content to walk. And that's not what we're meant to do. We're meant to run. And we're meant to run full force as much as we can by the grace of God. If you're in your 20s and your 30s, it is difficult to imagine because you can't see the finish line. But when you get my age, you do not want to see the line and then be filled with regrets of what you didn't do. That you took a 15-year break to give yourself to the cares of the world that aren't going to go with you. When you die, you take nothing with you. I'm not meaning this to be condemning or judgmental, I promise. But this is a call. This is a challenge. If you, and I believe this is true, if you mark your spiritual life in decades, then right now is a great time to take a stake and nail it in the ground with a little placard on it that says, "I started getting serious about running the race for God in January of 2020. And if you'll do that, 2030 will get here, and while I'll be 71 and I'll be a lot closer to the end of my race, some of you will just be getting started. But if you make up your mind to do that now, I promise you, and you run the race, whether you feel like it or not, whether you think God is with you like He ought to be or not, whether you think He's using you or not, if you make up your mind to run the race with diligence and endurance, and you do it, and this is my challenge. And those of you know, I went 8 years in a spiritual desert. I don't want to do that again, but I might have to. How do I know? The last 10 years of my life might be a spiritual desert. But I will tell you this, by God's grace, I won't stop running. Just like I did when I lived in Scotland, I ran that race even though I didn't feel it. But if you'll run that race, no matter how you feel, no matter what you think, and you do it for a decade, I guarantee you, in 10 years, you're going to look back and you're going to say, wow, God is more real in my life than He's ever been. I've seen God use me in ways I never dreamed. It's not been easy. It's been tough. I've had trials, but God is with me. And you will have, I'm telling you, I believe that. Some of us need to stop playing around with this faith walk like it doesn't matter how much effort we give. It does matter. It does matter. We will all, again, I'm not meaning this to be judgmental or harsh. This is the truth. We are going to, all of us, if we're saved and we know Him, we're going to stand in front of Him and we're going to give an account of how we ran this race. And I don't know about you, but I want Him to be happy with me. I want Him to be proud of me. I want Him to look at me and say, you know what? You screwed up a lot. You messed up a lot and you were really stupid a lot. But you kept at it. And I'm happy about that. That's what I want.
Amen.
Some of you are older than 20s. You don't want to get to the end and realize, like an athlete, that you could have pushed harder. That's why you compete, is to win, to do your best in the most difficult moments of competition. That's why they hold 4 fingers up in football, because all close football games are won in the 4th quarter. It's a test. Did you push yourself enough in practice and in endurance and in strength training that you're better than the guy across from you in the 4th quarter when you're tired and the game's on the line? You don't have to be the best. You got to be better than that guy right in front, or that girl, whatever sport. You got to be stronger and have more endurance than the person in front of you to win. You do not want to get to the end of your life and realize, you know what? I could have pushed myself more as a believer. I could have done less with the things of the world. Don't do that. Don't do that. I'm telling you my example. Look, I have messed up a lot. I have sinned an awful lot in my 43 years. I've been stupid. I'm still stupid. I do and say things all the time that I regret. But I've always run the race. Just like a silly story I told at the beginning. We got to stop complaining about how hard it is and how we don't, things aren't going the way we want. And why do I have this struggle? And, is God really with me? Does He love me? You know what? Stop complaining. Run the race. God will prove Himself. But you got to do your part. Do it today. Make up your mind that you're not going to dilly-dally anymore. I think I'm going to go through some more struggles. I hope I don't go through another spiritual desert. God help me. But I know I'm going to have struggles. The only thing I have confidence in myself is that I know I'm not going to quit. Because I haven't quit in 43 years. And I'm telling you now, I've been doing it this long, I'm sure not going to get tripped up now. There are plenty of temptations around me that are not going to get me now. They would have gotten me in my 20s and 30s. Not now. I'm too close. I see the clock. I've got to make it. And I've got to do it with all my might through the finish line. I'm going to do something we rarely do here. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to invite you to come up here and get on your knees. Some of you need to do that. Some of you feel impressed. You will feel impressed to do that. You don't have to. You can make an altar right there in your seat, but we're going to take a little bit of time here. We're going to play some worship music softly, and if you want to stay in your seat, that's fine. But wrestle with God. Make a decision today. Nail a stake in the ground that today's the day. I'm going to run this race. I'm going to be serious. And then I'll close after a little bit. Just give you a few minutes. So pray with me. Jesus, help us. Help us, God. Help us to run the race. You endured the cross so that we could run the race. You were separated from the Father so we could run a race. Help us to take that in consideration. Tanner, go ahead and start playing the music, if you will. Dim the lights. Turn the main lights down. Respond. I'm just asking you to respond to the Lord. If you feel impressed to come down here, do it. If you need to stay in your seat, do it. But let's take a few minutes, and I want you to wrestle with God and make a decision this morning. Jesus, help us, Jesus.